Welcome to Conversing. I am so delighted today and honored to have Beth Moore as our guest on Conversing. Beth is known to many of you who are listening to this podcast as a person whose reputation as a Bible teacher and as a person who speaks with great capacity and ability and grace and truth from the scriptures, especially to women, but also to many others beyond that. She has lived an adventuresome life, and it has been full of all kinds of things, which she beautifully and vulnerably describes in her latest book, a memoir that's entitled All My Knotted Up Life. Beth, thank you so much for being on Conversing today.
I could not be more pleased, Mark. Thank you so much for having me on.
You know, it's been some time since I've had you on as a guest, and we've had contact with each other. We've had lots of conversations. We've collaborated in a certain way, and we've discussed various things. But I have to say, I was just especially eager to come to this book as it came out just a few months ago, and to read more detail really about the journey that you've been on. Because while you're noted, I think, primarily as a Bible teacher, you are also a person who has, in the midst of that very thing that you've been so called to and so effective in carrying out, you've also been a person that's lived a pretty challenging life. And it wouldn't appear that without, just based on a stereotype of presence and public reputation, I suppose you could say, though I think you've always been known as an honest storyteller, and both in the honesty of the Bible and also in the honesty of your own life. So I'm just curious, as you came to the idea of writing a memoir, how would you describe how you went through the process of deciding to do such a bold and vulnerable thing?
I had been going back and forth over two different things I thought God might be pressing on me to write next. I've done this all along, where I've just had to go by what I felt like was pressing on my heart, or was most passionate to me, that would not somehow it would not deflate. It just would keep on building and building and building. And that's how I've always known to follow through with a major project, is that I couldn't get over it. Like I'd try speaking on it to think, well, maybe that will satiate it, and it would not. And then it would be the next thing that wouldn't do it either. So it would be, okay, full press into a project. And so I was going back and forth on two different things. And really the memoir was the second of the two in my mind. But the closer I got to time, I thought, no, I think it is the Holy Spirit moving that one in front. And it was wonderful timing in that the book has come out right at the year that I turned 65. And I guess, Mark, that's a very natural time to look back over your shoulder. It doesn't mean that your work life is over, but it is very much a time when you think, okay, most of my work life and most of my life, my journey on this earth is complete. And so you feel like you do have a pretty good look at it. Like, for instance, I think I'd have been scared to write something like this at 30, because it'd have been like, you know what, I haven't begun to know really what my story is yet. But at 65, even though it could have a lot of twists and turns ahead, you're able to look back and go, well, this is pretty much my life right here.
Right. One of the things that's striking about the book, and that has been commented on by various reviewers and people that have been talking to you or talking to the world about your book, is its vulnerability. And that includes not only your own personal vulnerability, but the vulnerability that you, I think, very delicately and wisely handle in relationship to your siblings, who shared a common home. And you tried, I know, and from my point of view, it felt to me like you were being highly respectful of the privacy of your siblings, and yet they and you, it sounds like, felt like this story could be told. And
Yes.
but I'm just curious, how did you go through the process yourself of realizing that you were going to divulge more than just your own story?
I'm going to go back a little bit and tell you some of the story to this, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it succinctly, but we've all wrestled in these recent years, finding ourselves on different sides of issues with people that we had agreed with on so many other things, and people that I was able to look at and go, their track record is so much better than mine. I mean, there were 1,000 times, I looked in the mirror and gone, have you lost your mind? Why is it that people who love Jesus so much, who love Scripture, could see things so differently? And let me take that a little bit further in that then there's an individual that had just had been very, very unkind to me publicly, and a servant of God, and what appears to be, and I believe to be, a faithful servant to God. And I happened on a podcast that just kind of rolled onto my my listening in my car, sort of accidentally. And it was him being interviewed, and he talked a bit about his marriage. And I mean, it was such a sweet story. And it was so strange, Mark. It didn't change any of the things he had said about me publicly, none of that. But it changed how I felt about him. I thought, he has a regular life and things that make him laugh. He's got favorite foods, all of these things that personalize when we get someone's story. And so I say to you, Mark, in a lot of the things where we've all landed, we've of course have landed with our convictions and where we believed the gospel to be clearest. Can I say, have I been right? I don't always know, but what I do know is that I have been true to my convictions, that in the dark of the night, if I rolled over in the bed at 3 a.m., that same woman, that to the bone, to the marrow of the bone, would have felt that way and would have been articulating the gospel in that kind of a context. And so I think that's it as much as anything. I don't know what to tell you at the end of the day where I'm concerned, but I will tell you this is my story. And if it gives it some context and it makes it a little bit easier, not to accept or agree with, but just to understand,
right,
then isn't that a good thing?
Right.
I think.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you've created a very good thing, and it certainly raises wrestling questions. It's a vivid portrait of an unfolding, sometimes agonizing, often joyful, celebratory, hopeful, but wrestling life of faith. And to me, those are great gifts. And we need that much more authentic portrait of what a life of faith actually is, rather than sort of true believism, which can often be one or two dimensional and doesn't usually get into the marrow of the places of deep challenge and struggle.
And don't you believe also, Mark, it's not fair to the people we serve, because here
Yes.
we know that we're torn or at war in our inner selves about something, but we're going to make that so black and white to them, and so clear, we're so right, that then they think something must be wrong with me. I know that I thought that struggling with some of these things, and to this day, I just thought, oh my goodness, even right after the book was released, honestly, it was just like, I guess this will be my whole life where everything's knotted up, because the book was no longer heading to the shelves than that my older brother, who's one of the dearest people in my story, just dropped dead of a heart attack, dropped dead. And it was such a time, I can hardly put into words what this season has been like. Grieving on the one hand, and then watching the Lord cause this story to be well received. And it's like, Lord, this is me. It just never seems to be there's this and then there is this. No, it's all knotted up in there, all this grief and gladness at the same time. And so I guess that's just going to be the way it is to the end till I see him face to face and he just unties it all.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you next, and you just beautifully expressed it, why the image that is in the title is the one that you chose of being, quote, knotted up, a knotted up life.
Yes.
So you've given us a window into that, but just expand a bit more on why you landed on that primary metaphor.
Okay, I'll give the two biggest examples because these are going to be things that I think many people that we're listening to that are listening to us can relate to. And to our listeners, I would want to say I want so much for this to minister, and so I pray that this will. But take my parents for instance, because our home, it was just such a mess and so unstable. And yet, if you ask me, well, Beth, were you loved in your home? Yes. Beth, were you also abused in your home? Yes. Such a mix of things. And so what it comes down to give a microcosm of the greater problem, I'm going to call it problem, conundrum, was just even trying to figure out, are my parents, is my mother all good, or is she some bad? Is my dad all bad, or is he some good? What I wanted so badly, to me, just the clarity of this is a bad person, this is a good person. And needless to say, Mark, I couldn't even figure that out about myself. I would go, no, you are a disaster. You're a disaster. You're a train wreck. And then, to look back and think God has done so many miracles. So it's that. And my brothers and sisters, listen, we all came up in this. And even though all 5 of us would be looking at it from a different place in the room because of our birth order. And, yes, and we're so spread out that even it was almost like 2 generations from beginning from the firstborn until the lastborn. And so you look at all that, yes, we feel differently, but all of us would say the same thing, and that's that something was really, really wrong in our home, and that we have the marks of it. I wish I could say that in coming through it and seeing so much grace and goodness of God, I wish I could tell you that all of it has been sorted out. But the truth of it is that, there are scars. What I watch for in my life is, are there wounds? What's bleeding? What's still bleeding? But I don't know. Jesus retained his scars. And I think, that those things will probably go with me to the grave. It's just, that's where it's knotted up. It's a beautiful thing and a brutal thing, this life we live.
Right. Let's take that a little further, because in the story you lay out, I think, beautifully in the opening chapters, some of the observations about your family. You have a wonderful way of writing that attaches people to you and you to people. It's part of why your ministry has been so blessed by God, because you have that connectivity that's deeply in you, and that it comes through your writing as well as your speaking. But one of the things that struck me is that in that process, you do, in this knotted up way, take us into various versions of what is in that knot. And it's really an unpacking in a way. So there's 2 parts of the book that I'd like to have you read. The first comes in chapter 4 at the first full paragraph of that chapter. By this stage, you've set the stage for many of the things that have gone on in your family. You've just given us a description of a lot of really important details. One of the things that you then at chapter 4 and on begin to really expand on is the role of the church in your life and the significance of it. I love that you grew up in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and I love that this depiction of a child's impression of a church is what it is. I'd like you to read that, perhaps just as background. In this reading, I'm saying for the sake of the listeners that in the first sentence, there's a reference to some place called the Royal Theater.
Yes.
That was the heart of the social life, apparently.
Absolutely, it was.
Arkadelphia, which I love. And that your father worked there.
He was the manager. He managed that, the Royal Theater. So it was a one-screen movie house on Main Street, and then also the drive-in movie on the outskirts of town. So that was this blend, this life lived between this theater and this church only a few blocks away. That truly, wow. Those things in parallel were quite an interesting pair.
Quite.
So yes, I'd be happy to read.
Give us a flavor of that if you could read that.
I will do that. Chapter 4, the very beginning. I could exit the Royal Theater with a pickle bag full of popcorn, take an immediate left on the sidewalk of Main, a quick right on North 7th after looking both ways, make a beeline down a few blocks, and before I got down to the Colonel's, enter the doors of a place homier to me than the red brick Tudor on 12th would ever be. School aside, the only place I spent more time than the Royal Theater was First Baptist Church of Arkadelphia. The building was nothing less than palatial, bouncing off the pupils of a child's wide eyes. The traditional 10 brick structures stood erect, several stories high, with tall, slender stained glass windows encasing a sanctuary meant to be taken seriously. Wings to the right and left held scads of educational space, a fine church library, a spacious preschool department and nursery, and on the bottom floor, a full church kitchen adjoining the fellowship hall. Big as it was to a small child, I knew every square inch of it save the boys' restroom. We who were raised in those halls in those days roamed and ran them freely.
I have to say that that's just really marvelous writing, but it's also a wonderful depiction of the blend of worlds, the Royal Theater and all of that meant to your family. But then here, this outpost in a certain way of hope that becomes a place that grounds you in ways that were essential, really, for your life and ultimately contribute substantially. So just expand on that a bit more as you think about what it was that you were experiencing. Obviously, in this paragraph, you go on to describe people, but in this paragraph, you're describing a space, but you're describing a space with a spiritual commitment that pervades it, in which you as a child were somehow receiving it. And I often think many people these days are amiss in these kinds of foundational experiences. So I'd like for you to just wax a bit on that.
I'd love to. Mark, I realized as I was reading that I was smiling so wide. And for much of that chapter, because I was writing on my childhood church, I smiled through a lot of those paragraphs and pages, because this is the central place of the best memories of my young life. And I'll say this to you without even a strong condemnation of family or parents or even father at this point. I just will simply state it as a fact. My home was my unsafe place, and my church was my safe place. And I have a very tender heart to the many people that it is absolutely reversed, or worse yet, their homes weren't safe and their churches weren't safe. That is heartbreaking. But for me, my home was scary, and there was something about walking through those doors and the trustworthy people there. And I want to make this point. None of them would have been perfect, all of them flawed, but they were true. I can tell you that the biggest hypocrisy I saw in my early childhood development in my faith was my own father. It was not the people who taught me in Sunday school and in choir and in handbells and all of that. But it's part of the knot here, because at the same time that the Lord had provided this wonderful refuge where I was given what I can only perhaps call the gift of faith. I believed Jesus was good, and I believed that Jesus was safe with children. And I don't even know how to explain how that got through my head. But somehow I could look at that picture with the kids crawling all over him. And all of us have seen, anybody in my generation that was raised in church has seen exactly the same poster of the children crawling up in his lap. And it was like, he is safe with children. And at the same time, in this knotted up life, my home, I am being abused in my home, and in a way that is so destabilizing, and early enough in my emotional development to mow down every sense of boundary, every sense of personal dignity and self-respect I possibly could have had. But that place, that church was a place of light. And it was just such a darkness and light to take those few blocks and move into a space where there was joy and there was goodness, not perfection, but just goodness. It was true. It was true. So it was very, very dear to me. The local church is dear to me. And in those days, and thank goodness, we went multiple times a week. And where I can tell you my parents did us a very big favor is because our home was so unstable that we were taken every single time the doors opened was a blessing, because that was where we got a second narrative.
Right.
Where we did not just, it wasn't just that we had the one to develop, but that we had a second narrative that continually challenged the first one.
I'm Mark Labberton. You're listening to Conversing. Beth, it's a big thing to have lived the story that is partly related to your father and his abuse, and then the implications of that for the whole family and for your parents' marriage and for your own experience growing up in the home. And the second part that I'd like you to read to give readers a sensibility of what you're trying to explore, I think very honestly and also sensitively, realizing that many that could be listening to this podcast are people who have themselves been implicated or involved in or abused by parents or by other people. And yet I think it's such an important part of your story, and I want to honor it. And I think it would give people a sense of what this means if you could read the paragraph that we discussed in chapter 5, that I think just captures some really profound things, which you then go on to explore.
I'd be so happy to. Page 58. Madness came for us. It descended on our roof, spilled over our gutters, and surrounded our house. It seeped through the cracks around our windows. This madness layered our faces, blanketed our bodies, entered our pores, and infected our blood. It haunted our rooms at night like a ghoul. It hammered, then shattered our security. I was 11, in the passenger seat of our car coming home from Little Rock, when I'd never again have the luxury of simply wondering if something was wrong. But somewhere, stuffed deep inside a drawer of my mind, I'd always known. A child doesn't pull chunks of her hair and chunks of her memory out of her head over nothing.
You go on in this chapter to explain the context and circumstances in which your father first abused you.
Yes.
And then you make evident through the course of the book the way that this continued and was such an enormous and damaging part of your childhood.
Yes.
And all during this time, you're basically keeping it as a secret, right?
Yes.
This is the way that it goes, of course.
Absolutely.
Right.
And still does for the most part,
Yes.
Mark. And it's
Yes.
one reason why those of us who are led of the Spirit, I don't think everybody ought to tell the details of their story. I don't tell the details of mine, but I am telling many more than I have in the past. But one reason why is because if some of us who feel the freedom to do so, and it is not harmful to us, that for whatever reason it is more healing than it is harmful, if we don't, then what continues to perpetuate is the shame and the secrecy of it.
Yes.
It takes people coming out and going, listen, this is not your shame. This is not your wrong. This was not your sin. You were a precious and dearly loved child of God. So a very, very important thing to me. And I had told early on, in the very first thing I wrote, I referenced my abuse. I just didn't tell who it was. And in fact, I did my very best to the point of being dishonest and changing the apostrophe on a particular word. And I explained that in the book. I tried to drive the reader away from thinking that it was within my own family, because listen, Mark, not because I wanted to protect my father, but because I wanted to protect my mother, and I wanted to protect my relationship with my mother. And whereas someone might think, well, surely that wouldn't have happened. Oh, yes. Yes, it would have. And there are many, many times that individuals are in the situation where to tell something on a family member puts them in such a poor and broken relationship with another loved one in their family that you're constantly asking, was it worth it? But yes, people do tend even today to just keep it to themselves and keep it secret. And I want to say this, Mark, we certainly know why for some in these last couple of years, as we've seen what social media did to them after they told. And, it's just, these things are, it is a very, very heavy thing to be abused and to carry the burden of whether or not to share publicly so that someone else might feel seen and known and less alone and might feel some hope. Or is it going to cost more than you're willing to pay? So it's a conundrum. You talk about something that's knotted up, and I would just suggest to someone they really work that through. For me, I had come to the place. It's been so many years of dealing with it and getting therapy and ministering to other people and spending time with the Lord, that I knew that it was not going to cause me destruction. So I was just ready and no regrets. And in fact, I was extremely relieved when it just finally was out there, so that I could even say, speaking sometimes, if I want to speak to the fact that it was incest, which is a very specific kind. All abuse is destructive, but there is something so very personal about incest. It feels very, very shameful. And then when it is your protector that becomes your perpetrator, it is a betrayal that is very hard to deal with. And so,
Right.
I wanted to be able to say to someone, I've already heard from so many women and some men, that have said to me and whispered in my ear, it was my father too. It was my father too. It was my father too.
So amazing, Beth. It's a major crisis in our world. I think it's at least 1 out of 4 girls and women experience abuse in some form over the course of their life, and I think the statistics are probably, understated at that point rather than overstated.
Recently, it was reported that it is getting closer to 1 in 3, and they are blaming the internet, social media, that kind of thing for it. That how many teenage girls now have been in some way sexually harmed by another before they reach young adulthood. And so it's even more of a crisis now than it was.
Yes. we live in a violent and violating world, which
Yes.
we all know. And
Good way to put
this
it.
is one of those things that often in the context of friendship or relationships or neighbors or connections or and family, these things happen in private, in a certain sense at least. They happen in private, and they happen in private in a way that is so shame-based that then the potential of it never surfacing, even fully to the person who's abused, let alone for the sake of a wider circle of people who might have come to that person's aid or could have in some way attempted to respond. Very, very challenging circumstances. We at Fuller, we're working with a number of organizations to bring forth a curriculum for seminarians, both for them and their own understanding of sexual abuse and their own
Really,
lives,
Mark?
but also to invite them to be prepared and trained for how to respond to cases
Yes.
of sexual abuse in their congregation or life in ministry and work. It's just at the very earliest stages. We're just laying the groundwork for it, but we're very committed to this, and it's going to take some real work to put all the resources together in order to do what we hope can be as productive and helpful as possible. Our psych school at Fuller is one of the reasons why we can attempt such an outrageous effort to do this, and yet it feels so imperative. And we're excited that there are foundations that are interested in this, and I think the prominence of this in your book is significant because it's a prominence in your life, and that is a very, very important thing for people who know you and trust you as deeply as so many tens and tens of thousands of people do, to be able to also have the confidence that even this can also be on the table in a particular way, and where there are steps that can be taken, both preventative steps, but also healing steps that can be taken.
Oh, Mark, I could not be more pleased to hear that you guys are going to implement such an education. I love that. And I want to say it matters. I'm going to tell you, as a survivor and as a person in ministry that has, I don't have any idea. There'd be no way I could estimate over 40 years of time how many women that I've talked to at this point that have my background, that have stories, just, and by background I mean of abuse, but it's a very wide range of kinds of environments and abusers that would be involved in that. But all to say, I do believe with all of my heart that the church, let me start right there, that the church and that many institutions, Christian institutions, are less safe places for abusers than they were, I'm going to say, even 3 years ago. I do believe that. I do believe it. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't. And there was a time that I certainly would have been far more cynical about it. But I think that the more we've talked about it, I think that this has been a gift. I don't care how people feel about Me Too as a movement, but the idea of it, which is to say to another person, oh my goodness, that has also happened to me. And to be able on a public platform say, I'm one of you. Anybody else out there? And can we believe that we can be okay? This has impact. To be able to educate people on what grooming looks like. I told a young woman here recently, I said, I need to say something to you. I need you to understand that predators can have fabulous personalities. And I said, that don't ever have in your mind that they're always creepy, because there is a very, very well executed plan that we call grooming that often takes place through winsome personality. So I'm not discouraged at all from the last couple of years. I wish more would happen, but I do think that it is less safe for predators than it was prior to 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, yes. The story that you tell, of course, carries this burden over the long arc of it, even up to and including the death and burial of your father, which I just want to say, I was so grateful that you continued the long arc, because if people are prone to think that these things are incidental and exist in a time-bound space, they just don't understand the nature of trauma and abuse, right? It is with you for life, and that's one of its horrors and tragedies and great injustices. But thank you for that arc, because I think it's a strength that helps many people who have been abused, I think, to understand and see and taste the seasons, the in and out of seasons, the rise and fall of the crisis that may have happened a long time ago. So thank you.
I think also, Mark, yes, trauma has long range implications. Oh my goodness. There are times that you'll have thought, I've dealt with so much of that. And then, for instance, maybe now you're a mom of a daughter that is that same age that you were, and you just cannot imagine how it will just come swinging back at you, because now you feel all that protectiveness over them. But I do want to say that then there's the Lord. And so the thing about the Lord, the thing about the power of his word and the sustaining power of his word, is that too has long range effects. In other words, he's never quit doing some kind of healing and showing something good out of what I've been able to share, and the pain that had come that I'm able to say to someone else. So I know what that's like, and I know the doubts that it can bring. And so even, yes, in my father's death, even in my, with my siblings, as I was writing the book and as I sought their blessing, I have 4 siblings, and it was very important to me that all of them knew. And I didn't so much ask their permission as I asked their blessing, and that I asked, what can I do to make it doable for you, to make it where it does not cause any destruction to you? I can change your names. I can do all sorts of things to deflect from you. And all of them were like, we're in. And you can't imagine what a wide range of difficulties we have all had. And I will say this much, and I don't think they would mind me saying it. My story is only a piece of this pie. I was very careful to stick with my own. I'm not the only one in the family who has one.
Right.
It was something I told one of my siblings a couple of days ago. I said, she had just ended it. She had just finished reading it. And so she wrote me a text, 5 inches long. And I'm feeling choked up trying to tell you about it, because it's so fresh to me. But she was telling me how she felt about it, and I was so deeply moved by it. But I told her, I said, maybe one day you will tell your story. And I said, but if you don't get the chance, I told mine for us both. And it was a very, very tender moment. And I knew that she was like, I'm so glad that we are a bit more known.
Yes. The faithfulness that you describe of God is something that, again, the people who are listening to our podcast, I just want to encourage you to read the book. But one of the reasons why I would encourage you to read the book is that the layering that you portray of the way that this constant in and out of season, the constant sense of ongoing stability and instability that continued with you in so many ways for so long, mm-hmm. and the enormity of many of the challenges mm-hmm. that you face. It's not as though you're beating your breast and claiming sacred ground of your story over anyone else's story. You're just trying to lay out the texture of what the vulnerabilities were in your family, in you, in your marriage. I mean, it's really it's an extraordinary story. But the faithfulness of God through that is one of the things that, as you know, so many people would lose any sense of that capacity to discern the faithfulness of God, given the turbulence of things that you've passed through. So I'm curious. Clearly, the role of the scriptures is a very, very significant part of your experience of the faithfulness of God. Mm-hmm. You've written a lot about that, but just for readers who may be just getting acquainted with you, how is it that a person can experience the faithfulness of God in the Bible, especially when you're going through such really difficult experiences?
It has been such an interesting part of my experience that I came to voraciously love to study the scriptures before I realized that it was doing me any real good. So I loved it. I'm a student. In fact, if they could see us, they would know that I just sat straight up, because now we're going to talk about the scriptures. And now let's go, because this is life and breath to me. But I didn't realize that when I had that flame lit in me by the Holy Spirit to love the scriptures and to study. I mean, I could not get enough. I could not get enough. I was in my first Bible class, and I drove the teacher absolutely crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy, asking questions, asking for more, all the things. But what I would know several years later was the cry of the psalmist who said, and he sent forth his word and he healed me. And I wouldn't say that in the past tense the same way, but I will tell you that throughout, the Lord was sending forth his word and he was healing me. He literally in real time was renewing my mind. And mind you, I wasn't going after it for that. I was going after it as a student who had a love for God and found the scriptures to be the most fascinating thing to this day. This morning, and this doesn't happen every day. I'm in it every day. I start my day, my morning in it. But even this morning, just those words just leapt off that page. I love it. I just love it. And I trust the one who inspired it to us. I believe that the heart of God is good. I believe that God is light and in him is no darkness. So that's a very important part of this. What I would say and do all the time. Someone young will say to me regularly, I want to love the Lord. And I want to love scripture like you do. And, of course they mean like anybody does that they see out there that has a real appetite for it, that they know is genuine. And I always tell them the same thing. Pray, Lord, give me a hunger and thirst for it. Give me a love, give me a supernatural love for your son. And I've asked that for myself, for my husband, for my children and grandchildren, more than any other single thing. And so in doing so, coming to not just love the scriptures, but to love God who gave them to us, to love the Savior who they were given to us to magnify and exalt to the highest place and be given the name that is above every name. That was everything. And so my mind was so preoccupied with that which was dark, which it often is. If you have not been well loved, that is not to say you haven't been loved. I'm saying if you've not been well loved by healthy people and loved in a healthy way, then of course, especially if you've got abuse in your background, then there's just this mental torment. And then there's a torment of unforgiveness. So it's one thing after another. And what was happening is that I didn't have time to spend on all the torment. So, I would go back there, of course, but I suddenly got preoccupied by something I found to be so exciting and so exhilarating. And for me, it was a very healthy thing. And that was the study of the scriptures. And little by little, he was renewing my mind and causing me to take him at his word, which was to say, that I was precious to God, created in his image, and that Jesus took personally what happened to children, that Jesus was also merciful. Mark, by the time I really could process as an adult what offense Jesus took on behalf of children, I took that so seriously that it turned my prayers for my father. And I asked the Lord, have mercy on him. I won't forget, because I thought Jesus so disapproved of what my father did to me that then I was like, Lord, I want you to know in you, I'm going to be all right. And would you make him all right? Would you just have mercy on him? I've needed your mercy too. Would you also have mercy on him? These were the kinds of things I learned from Scripture, and it had its impact, and it still does. I don't know where I'd be. I don't know where I'd be without it.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that strikes me in your story is just the permeating presence of people who over time did come to love you well,
Yes.
and who were people that were like of a different kind, like the church
Yes.
in Arkadelphia, but also the wider range of the church in various places as your ministry and life continued to take hold. What about friends of abused people can be? What would be some words that you would give as an encouragement to friends who want to come alongside people who have been abused?
Oh, I'd love to do that. And I'm the reason I've got my Bible close by and I'm grabbing it because we are all in situations where we want to be there for people and know that it's God's will for us to be there for people that we cannot even relate to in that way. We have never had anything like that happen to us. And this, for instance, this is where what I'm about to read to you, that I would say this is the same with the abused. I'm about to read to you in the context of racism. I have not known what it was like to be not in the majority white culture in this nation and to be more privileged. I've not ever known anything outside of that. I would still tell you that even as a child growing up in the home that I did, there were still privileges that we had that are Black neighbors in a whole different part of town that lived in a whole different section of the town had. And so this is something that has always meant a lot to me, or has really driven a lot of my decisions in the last years in reference to fighting racism. In Hebrews 10:33, sometimes you were publicly exposed to taunts and afflictions, and at other times you were companions of those who were treated that way. And that's what I would say, to be companions to those who are treated that way, to be able to say to someone, I don't have your experience, but I want to know how to be a good friend to you. And I want to know how to stand by you and how to stand for you. And could you help me with that? What would help you? For instance, Mark, I can tell you that when people say, what do I say when someone tells me they were abused? I can tell you that all this, to try to go into your deep doctrines and theologies right then is really just not the best idea. That what they really need from you, and I believe this is God's will, and I believe it's part of what is seen in this earth, is leaning across that table. I do this on a regular basis. Lean across that table, look them in the eye, and with every bit of sincerity you've got, say, I am so sorry that happened to you. And that one of the things, you hear my voice break here and there, and it's not because I'm sad, but because I'm tender about it. But one of the sweetest things that has come from the book, I've heard it over and over, and I wasn't expecting it, so it's come as a surprise to me, is how many people who said, I just wish I could have taken that little Beth in my arms and said, oh, you are so precious and so dear to the Lord and so lovable. And, that's just compassion. That doesn't fix anything, it would seem, except that it's a way that we love that person. And, I think about people like, Russell Moore, who's a very dear friend of mine. And, he does not come from my background at all, at all. I know nothing of any kind of firsthand knowledge he would ever have of abuse of the kind that I've had. And yet he has been one of the foremost spokespeople for the abused that I know. And he doesn't even, he just has been given the gift of compassion. And okay, God's given me a voice. How can I use it for them and to try to understand how we think and how things hit us and how we process something that to you might seem like, well, that's not really a big deal, where to somebody with my background would just go, that is so triggering. I don't even know what to do with it. Just have somebody care enough to learn what supports you, what helps you. And I think that's crucial.
Beth, one of the things that is so permeating the book is what I would just call genuine hope. And it's noteworthy because there is so much struggle and pain, injustice, suffering, confusion, tumult. And yet, I would say the overarching part of the book is that despite and in the midst of and alongside all of that, those challenges, is really this real hope. That is the hope of Jesus Christ that knows you and loves you and holds you in the middle of this extraordinarily battering experiences. And I just want to thank you again for writing the book, for being a guest today, for sharing today and certainly more expansively in the book, the richness of what culling one's life story can actually mean, both for you and also for the beauty and the generosity that you show that invites other people to do the same in their own lives. So I just want to thank you so much for being a friend. Thank you for being a guest, and thank you for the dependency and faithfulness of telling a hard story and seeing Jesus Christ in it.
It is my great privilege. Thank you so much for giving me this joy, Mark.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Conversing on your favorite podcast app to listen to new episodes as they are released. And please leave a review. Conversing is produced by Peter Laberton and distributed by Fuller Studio.